Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in today. So I made a slight boo-boo on Twitter saying that I was starting at 10 when I'd scheduled it for 10:30, but hey, I hadn't had enough coffee.
You started your stream. I was only going to show you that. It's been changed out 3 weeks.
Okay.
I didn't realise you started.
That's okay. Sorry. My wife was informing me about bins. Exciting life of an adult. So we're building an API skeleton today. So it's going to be a lightweight alternative to the Laravel/Laravel repo. It's going to be aimed at APIs. Clearly, it's me. I like APIs. Is what we're going to do. Some ideas that I've had is registering resources in configuration to generate routes, JWT auth by default, cleaner defaults, user management built in, standard response classes and error handling going on, cleaner routing for APIs and versioned APIs, moving core Laravel files into a .laravel directory, which was a really cool idea that I saw on Twitter. Business logic under source for the DDD side of things, a few kind of artisan commands to help build out logic, PHP stan level 9 throughout as standard, and the kind of the reset workflow, password workflow, and the confirming email workflow designed around APIs instead of anything else. I found a really cool old project called Dingo, which is kind of not supported anymore, but it had a few cool ideas and a few good principles that I wanted to look into. So JSON API responses, request data into payloads, dispatchable jobs, caching strategy, response caching, and headers galore. There's loads of ideas that I want to achieve here. Because I felt a lot of frustrations when building APIs. I spend, a good few hours cleaning up Laravel to the way that I need it so that I can start building an API. So yeah, let's see what's going on. Let's get started and yeah, let's do it. So this is Launchpad. I'm going to be using Launchpad. It's a package that I built yesterday evening. So I've got things like setting up PHP stan and Laravel Pint to a very specific version and set specific kind of configuration. We got some helpers for like the caching, resolving typed values from config, portal, which is an access into the database manager, and a dispatchable command bus so that I can inject that command bus and dispatch jobs to the background through it instead of using the facade. We've got a renders inertia component, which basically just resolves the response factory from inertia into controllers. We've got a few contracts, some API responses. Nothing major, but enough to get me started. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new project. Let me just stick this to the top. And the way I'm going to start this is by using the default Laravel skeleton and refactoring it to where it wants to be for me. So we're going to go Laravel new. I'm not too sure what to call it yet. So I'm just going to call it skeleton, maybe. I'm definitely going to want Git installed or Git enabled on it so that I can track progress. I will be using Pest because I use Pest for everything. And I think that's probably enough to start with. So let's get that going. That is going to install and set up, which means that over here I can start a new project from existing files. Almost finished. So let's get in here and let's find skeleton. So we've got this set up. We are good to go. There's a README. It's all good. What I need is Launchpad. So I actually haven't pushed this up to packages yet. So I need to submit a new package to Packagist. So we're going to go github.com, just Steve King /Launchpad check that. We're all good. Submit. Not auto-updated yet, so that's fine. So here is our skeleton. And what we want to do is, the first thing I do in any Laravel project, Pest is awesome. I just love using it, to be honest. It makes testing fun again. I'm just going to zoom in, make sure you can see the code. So what I'll do, I will hide my beard, hide the face, so you can focus on the code again. If you feel a bit too detached, then let me know and my face will appear. So let's come over to Composer. Let's first off swap that to 2. Let's run a Composer update quickly. Editor config isn't important right now. Then we're going to do a Composer bump to bump all the dependencies and another Composer update. Right. So I'm going to rename this to just Steve King Skeleton. For Laravel APIs. Laravel framework API. And what I need to do quickly is just fix that license. Then we're going to want to add authors for anyone else who wants to contribute. I am a developer. My name is Steve McDougall. Email is, I can't even spell today. Steve McD. So I like to keep these things consistent across all packages, even if it's got its own dedicated homepage or for building it for work, so that it's all tied back to this one specific profile. This keeps things clean in my mind. And that is all done. Getting started. So that is all of that. All of this is going on. What I like to do as well is have a nice, easy way to run, like Laravel Pint and PHP Stan, vendor bin, Pint. We've got Stan. We have to install PHP Stan, of course. I think it should be included by default, personally. Up the memory limit to 3 gigabytes. And we're going to set up our tests. PHP Artisan test. Add, git commit, and then we're going to say setting up dev scripts. How do I use Laravel? Currently, I just use it manually. Yeah, I use it manually at the moment, just as part of my workflow. But there are other ways that you can do this, I suppose. May not install because my stability is stable, so we'll swap that to dev and we'll try it again. There we go. We have got Launchpad now installed. See if it's installed everything. So as you can see, at the moment, I don't have Laravel Pint or Laravel Stan config set up. So I can set up PHP Stan and I can set up Laravel Pint. Always add, which now means that I've got this set up and I've got my Pint config all imported. Excellent. git add git commit dev config files and launchpad. Right, so what I mentioned that I wanted to do was have like a .laravel directory. I think that'd be pretty cool. So if I just create a new directory called .laravel, and what we're going to do is create a new namespace for this. So we're just going to call this Laravel. It's going to be under the .laravel directory. So if we just do a quick composer update, looking good. Hey, cache directory must be present and writable. Okay, I don't know what that's doing, but okay. Oh, maybe not Laravel. Maybe we call this like core. Maybe it looks like there could be conflicts there. Okay, so we're going to have this in here. So I'm just going to grab Bootstrap and move that directly into there. What we're going to do, we're going to run a server, and we're just going to kind of go through it as it goes. So Bootstrap app doesn't exist. Expected that one. So in here, what we can do is start by just declaring some strict types. Let's make sure PHP is on the right version. Yeah, we're good. I hate having comments everywhere. They really just get in the way. And the autoload is fine. And then we're going to go .laravel app. Okay, let's redo this. So require once current directory, back a directory, .laravel bootstrap app.php. Laravel bootstrap app. Let's run that again and see what it says. On Artisan, cool. So on Artisan, what we also need to do is declare strict types. Ignore that. We know what registering the autoloader is. .laravel bootstrap app. You all know about that part. Making stuff, shutting down the application. Good. Right, let's try again. Hey, the something directory doesn't exist in Finder. So require once.laravel, bloody blah. This is where I've broken it too much already, right? Index. Let's try this again. No, empty question mark. Sorry, empty quotes from something. Go into here. Finding important things. Turning the application. So what I'm going to do is in here. Let's just die and dump on app. Let's see if we're actually getting this. We are getting that. You have a point. Something directory doesn't exist. Let's just double check this. Core Laravel. So that is working. We're getting this. Getting errors though. Where are errors coming from? The directory doesn't exist. Skeleton, Laravel, eliminate exception handler. Directory not found. Finder. Well, what is even looking for this? We're making a request. Okay, so app equals fire current directory. All that requirements. Replace namespace, register errors, view path. This is kind of what I expected to be happening. Lots of things going wrong as we're building it out, because that's what's going to happen. If facade root has not been set, call stack, public index. Hey, James, good to see you. Update quickly. So what is something is dependent on this being here, right? What could it possibly be? Well, first off, let's delete v because we don't want it. Let's delete packages. Let's delete CSS and JS. Let's delete a view. Let's make sure that we keep that by adding a dot keep. Close all of those tabs. So at index. Require once. Doesn't work. This part is not going to have an issue. That shouldn't be an issue. We should have app here. Do we have a request of, can we capture the request? That is a question. Let's see. We do. The serve isn't working, but that's fine. It's almost like it's looking for that, and artisan is almost being ignored. So let's delete the require once. Laravel start. Okay, so something's going on. I have dumped the autoloader. Dump the autoloader and optimize. Still saying that isn't working. So let's see if that runs. Let's see if we can even run artisan right at this second. Okay, so something's not working. So let's take Bootstrap back out. Let's delete that. And let's take it back to where it was so we can step through it. Let's delete that. So if I suppose a dump the autoloader there, package manifest. I've broken it that badly already. Yeah, I've removed vendor and retry it. I'm assuming something's going on. Let me remove the lock as well. And then we're just going to Composer install quickly. So it's falling over itself a little bit as soon as you move it. So something is what's going on with .laravel.cache. It's got storage logs in here. It's almost like the base path has been moved. So if I just delete the .laravel for now, see what it says. This should all be fine. Index, artisan's looking in the right place. So let's just aserve. We'll come back to moving some of these core files. Let's open this. View welcome not found. That's fine. We'll come back around to this and see what we can do. So let's start with the basics. Routing. So in our root service provider, we've got this, which we don't like. Got a rate limiter. We got this. We want to drop that prefix. We don't want the web routes. This bit can just be kind of cleaned up. So we've got Routes API for now. That's the only one that we care about. So we can delete the web. In here, what we want to do is just have like that initial route. We want to do a quick GET request. Anything going to there should return an array. Laravel will just handle that. And we're just going to say ping. Oh, ping pint. Ping pong. Simple. Let's make that static. Ping pong, we got it. Excellent. So that is working. Routing is now there. We can set this up. Callback is there. Let's clean this up. Let's make that static and add limit. I don't like that style. I prefer to have short syntax. So our callback has a max attempt of 60, and we're doing this key here. So we're just going to string val it. That cleans that up quite nicely. The roots are then in nicely. So we're just going to static function that. And we're going to say that nothing is returned. Our provider is looking okay for now. There's types there. So what we also want to do is make sure that loads. We're good. So let's go back to our Notion document a second. Where did it go? Where did it go? Here we go. So cleaner defaults, standard response classes, cleaner routing, directory source for business logic. We want to eventually move into a .laravel directory. This we're going to call a core. So what don't we care about, basically? So if I create a new .laravel, and if we do another composer dump reautoloader, is it going to break if I just add a .laravel? Yes, it's already breaking. So it looks like we're going to have to rename .laravel to .core or something. Looks like the .laravel is something that they're working on internally, maybe for 11. So let's composer dump the autoloader. Serve, and we're still good. So yeah, the .laravel must be something that they're working on internally. Is the only thing I can think of there. So what we want to do is this bootstrap, we want to move into core, refactor. So now if we do composer dump autoload and a serve, we're getting errors, which is fine. So public index .core. Then in our artisan as well, we want to move that to .core. Run that again. Hello from India and Morocco and everywhere else. Okay, for some reason, it's still doing the directory doesn't exist. What stage is that dying? So it looks like it's somewhere down, something to do with the bootstrap. So if I keep bootstrap outside of there, delete that storage, and we remove that, and inside index here, we're also going to stop that. That it works as long as we aren't moving the bootstraps. That I can live with. Why am I using a .core directory? Just to clean it up, making it slimmer. So let's close all of those. And what we want to move into core is maybe our providers. So let's move core providers over to here. Core providers, here's our app service provider. Every file I touch, I try to leave better than I found it. That's kind of my methodology, is if I'm going to open a file, it's got to be left better than how I first found it. It just means that I'm always focusing on how can this be better instead of what do I need to do. So delete that. Yeah, it's got to be something. It's got to be something. So then our broadcast service provider as well. We're going to add that there. Move this to final. I like to create this under sockets roots personally. So if I come down to roots, create a new directory for sockets, and then I grab the channels, move that over, rename it to roots. This is just my way of organizing things. You don't have to do it this way, obviously. This needs to be a static function and it needs to return a bool. This is a user and this is currently an integer. That isn't needed. I can use a get key, which is mixed. And then we can type that one just to clean it up a little bit. Also, we could probably use short closures for this, meaning things are consistent. You need to return anything. Means that is now just a small one-liner. That is all fine. Let's delete that gap because it's not needed. Close all of those. Come down to the event service provider. So declare strict types. Make it a final class. Don't need those like that right now. Boot method does nothing. This is identical to the parent one. So I can delete that. That isn't needed. And then in my root service provider, I can now revisit this. Is there anything not being used? Not at the moment. So API roots. And down in roots, I can create a new directory for API. Grab API, move that into there, and we can call that roots. Refactor, rename, roots. That just leaves this one console, which I don't like to use personally. So if I come over to my console kernel, delete that, and it's not needed. Delete that. There's some strict types. Make that final. Delete that initial thing there. This is something that we're going to fix. Yeah, I like final classes. Taylor really doesn't like final classes, but I do. So that is me. So I feel like core should also include the console, like this. Then we can also have our own console directory within here. I'm going to add a .git keep. Ooh, gkeep. Let's give that a real name. There we go. So this kernel itself, what we want to do is when we're loading, this is looking for an array of paths. To start with, we're just going to use the one path. And what we're going to do is take this, Steve, commands, app, console commands. That into there. So this doesn't have the kernel in it. This is now core console. So that down in our Bootstrap and app, this is now pulling in from there. So anything that I add into app from a command perspective, it's all focused within here. Core, if you need to modify the core, it's all in here. Otherwise, it's not. The exception handler. Well, the exception handler doesn't make sense for it to be inside the app because you never make real changes. It doesn't contain the application code. It is kind of DDD. It's not real DDD, especially not yet. It's getting towards it. So we want an exception here. This is report using this. You never really, I personally don't do much with this, but I'm going to clean it up. Final class, declare strict types. Let's come back down to app. That handler has now been moved. Let's do this again. Let's make sure it's all doing good. And that works. Our handler is moved. What we're going to do is we're going to create another exceptions directory, and we're going to add another .git keep. Because the idea here is that app should only contain your application code. Core is all of the kind of stuff that's binding that Laravel framework into your app. And then source and domain will also be used later. So HTTP kernel, middleware, controllers. To start with, this controller is never actually used, but I do keep it. Don't need to, but I do keep it. I just make it abstract because it should be abstract by default because it's never used on its own. My opinion, don't have to follow me, but there we go. Camille, thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Does anyone want some music on in the background or not? I know it's very quiet. Some people have complained about the noise, the music sometimes. So if I turn it like really low, I'm going to go for this one. Just feels a bit strange for me not having any music or audio on, because I'm either listening to music, watching YouTube things while I'm working, or sometimes I even just listen, watch Star Trek in the background while I'm working, because Star Trek is life. So that still works. That's all still working. What we're also going to do now is let's look at this HTTP directory. We add to this, but we don't modify it much. So let's also move this. Let's see if it still works. We're still good. So next, Let's declare strict types in here. Make this final. Clean out these comments that aren't really needed. These are fine for now, but we're going to come back to them. I don't actually need any of those. I don't actually use substitute bindings, and I don't want to ensure front-end requests are stateful. Trust hosts I don't use, but we'll come back to that. That will be renamed to core later on if needed. Web API, these middleware. So I don't use basic. I'm not going to use session. I'm not going to use any redirecting. Yes, we'll use that. We'll use authenticate, but we're actually going to use the parent authenticate, the illuminate one, because we don't actually care about redirecting, which is all this one does, is controls the redirect, which we're not going to use. So we can delete that. Don't need that. We don't need to verify cross-site request forgeries. Let's come back to this. Authenticate, set cache headers. We do want authorize. We do want require a password. We don't want that. We don't want any password confirm. We do want to be able to have signed routes, and we do want to throttle requests. We do want to have verified emails. Converting empty strings to null, yes. We want to be able to trim strings. We want to validate post size. We want to prevent requests during maintenance. We also want to handle calls, and we want our trust proxies set up. That is my cleaned up kernel. So now over here, I can go directory, HTTP. I'm also going to create the middleware over here as well. I actually think these do belong over here. So that our kernel here, let's just delete that. Our kernel here will use the right location app. But this controller, this base controller, doesn't belong in our main app because it's never used. If I close down core now, inside middleware, I can start to clean these up. Make this final class. I need to do that. Prevent requests during maintenance. This could be useful later on. Trimming strings, heap, because it is clearly useful. Trusting hosts we aren't using. Parent one is kind of okay. So we could, in theory, just kind of remove that. It's not being loaded. We're just going to remove that. Proxy. I'm just going off of what I typically do. You want to focus on my voice. Listen to my voice, not around my voice. This should actually be the Symfony one. I want to be clear. Yeah, PHP Storm does so much for you. If you aren't using it, you should be. If you don't have a license, get in touch and I can see what I can do to help you out. I know that the cost is quite steep. I delete all of those because they're not relevant. We don't do any sort of web stuff. All of that is good. Our models are great. All of this is now clear. So let's add a new controllers. I'm going to add a .git keep. This is going to be all of our controllers. Here's all our middleware. Here's our models. So far, we've done a few changes. Let's make sure this still loads the way that we need it to. And we're good. So we can say git add, git commit, moving to core. Right. That is the start. So next, what can we do next? We've got API down here. We've got sockets there. We've got a test. Let's make sure our tests are all set up the way that we need them to. Test case. Let's just import that class. We don't need any of this. We add our own later on. Refresh database. We're not worried about right now. Creating the application. Let's declare some strict types. Let's just do a quick cleanup here. And the test case here. We're good. Close all of this. We want to check inside app and inside core. Pint should be fine. So let's do a quick compose a pint. Let's make sure it still runs and works. We're good. Just close that one off. So let's run composer scan. Let's make sure that our static analysis is all okay. Source doesn't exist yet, so let's create that. We will need that later on. Two errors. Root service provider. Limit per minute expects int float given. Okay, so let's go start. Root service provider, line 22. That's the first issue resolved. Cannot access property ID on mixed. So this, maybe that will help solve that issue. No. No safe request use this instead. Okay, so this could be null. How could we possibly do this? So what we want to do here is we want the user's ID as the key. If that's not available, we want that. So really, could we not do an auth check instead? Auth facade, get the ID or the request IP. Yeah, now we're good. So that's resolved that. This home is no longer needed because it's not used. So the way you can tell that in PHP Storm is if it's grayed out, it means it's unused because I've deleted the middleware that needed it. That's now working perfectly. Actually, yeah, no, I still need that. Add git commit. Cleanup operation almost complete. So next step, come over to our roots, API roots. I don't want that. What I want is a new directory here called v1. And this is going to map our v1 roots. So we can have our roots in here. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to have a user facade here. We're going to do a get request. Let me just simplify that one quickly. We go to this one. All we're going to want to do is have a quick callback, which is just going to say, replace it with ping pong. Similar to what we've got here, but now we can replace that and we can say root prefix v1 as v1 group anything from the base path under routes API v1 routes.php. Now, if I come down here and I do an a route list, got one here. So let's just add a name of ping. Oh, pint. Keep doing that. So we've got v1 ping. Perfect, right? So now if I just kind of serve that, so by default, we're going to get a 404. That's fine. Let's just go to v1. Opportunities. Here we go. v1, ping pong, good to go. Add, commit, starting to version API routes. Next, we've got all of that working. That is going to be fine. Everything in app is specific. Then in here, we're going to want our domains. And we're also going to want to input our infrastructure. Do I spell things correctly? So down in Composer, what we also want to do is domains under source domains, and then infrastructure. I always have to double check that one for spelling. So now we can Composer dump auto load, make sure it still serves. Yep, still looking good. So when we think about infrastructure, or sorry, our domains for a basic application, we're always going to have at least one. We're going to have our identity here. We're going to want a provider. And we're going to want to have a binding service provider. Providers binding service provider. Now I'm going to keep this one in here instead of moving it off to core, because this controls how certain things are being registered. So this one, the idea of this binding service provider here is that it will register or our domain for us, basically. So down in our app down here, we've got all of our core providers. Let's swap this to core. So we're going to call this core service providers. Then we're going to have our application service providers here. So we'll have app providers binding service provider. So this will then register everything inside our domain. So the first one we want is our identity. Now this needs a binding service provider of its own. This needs to extends service provider. What's wrong with this? I think that's spelled right, but we'll find out. So our binding service provider here. So this app register the provider we want to use is a binding service provider in our domain. So I like to pull this in. Port class has an alias, and we're going to call this identity service provider. Let's Google it. I'm terrible at spelling. What's going on? I don't know it's spelled correctly. It must be. It is spelled correctly. Oh well, these things happen. So this binding service provider will then just bind everything that's needed within this domain, so that if I ever need to stop a domain from running, I can just do that and away we go. I've shown this before. It's not a new concept. So domain, what we're going to do here is we're going to add a keep the folder name, identity, refactor, rename. Aha, identity. My bad. Refactor, rename, identity. Good catch, good catch. Good catch. All right. Add all of this. Commit -m, and we're going to say started to create the identity domain. So this is where our users are. Now, my approach for DDD, specifically Laravel, is that our app still needs to be our app and our domain still needs to be our domain, which is why we moved all of our core stuff out. So we will still have controllers within here. What I'm going to do first is publish the stubs. And I don't care about that. I don't care about any of these things here. I don't care about that one. Definitely don't care about view or the tests. Scope, don't use them. Don't use resource collections. Don't want a plain policy. Don't use observers. Everything else I'll keep because I'm somewhat likely to use. The one that I want to use straight away is this controller here. I want to make sure that I am setting it up the way that I like to. So I don't need that. I don't need that. This should by default be final, and I don't want any comments. So this is how I like to have them set up. So when I create things, they are where I need them. Then when I start creating models, I like to make sure these are set up the right way. The script types is 1. Delete that comment. Delete that comment. This should be static. It doesn't return anything. I like to have my default of ULID personally. I have timestamps at the bottom, identifiers at the top, properties in the middle. That is the Steve approach. So then down on the model here, I can say declare strict types as 1. Make this a final class. I always have to double check the name for this one. So use has ULIDs. So grab that. Add that there. Use has ULIDs. And we're going to want protected. Fillable is always going to want to be in there. And I think that's going to save me a little bit of time in the future. That's good. That's good. That's all we need to start with, other than the factory itself. So we can quickly declare strict types on this one. Drop that. in a second. We always have a protected model where this is the namespace model class. We've got a definition here, which will return an array. This will be final, and I drop that generic part there. And that is where we start with. So let's go have a look at our database stuff, our migrations. So clear that up, make this static, give this a ULID. We won't need a remember token because we aren't using the web. I like to move timestamps groups together at the bottom. Name, email, password, that's all fine. We need to look at password resets later because we want it to work differently. But the default behavior for now is fine. Failed jobs are also fine. This one I keep with an ID because I can't access the model. Personal access tokens. Let's just quickly clean up this file. This will be a ULID morph. Let's just kind of give it some breathing room. That is all good. So I can now come over to my model and we can clean that. Just hide the password. It has ULID, so that's all sorted. But what we also want is each user needs to have like a role. I think that's important. And I typically do these in enums. So this is then customizable. You can have case user as user, case admin as admin. Why do I use this schema callback function as static? Because it is static. If I remove that. So this closure can be declared as static. It gives better scoping, and in some cases it can improve performance. So because it isn't actually using anything from the parent, it is static. It's pulling in table. If I then said this, it's going to complain because it's static closure. But because I'm not using any kind of parent context, I don't need it. Next, we're going to say table string role. The default for this is going to be role user. A very simple way to implement this sort of stuff. Let's start working on this now so that our model can use keyboard user class. Remember token can be deleted. I hate that this is used. I like to use a hash facade. Make the value is password. So let me explain why I don't like that. So that is what was there. So this is password decrypted. Nothing wrong with that. However, you've got lots of different options in config for hashing bcrypt argon2id, and if you swap this, your password's not going to work. I also don't like to use fake because what this does is basically just kind of, it does a lot of building and checking if some things are built when the factory already has faker injected as a property. We've got a faker already. So if we've already got one built, why would we then want to, go and grab an instance when it's already got an instance? Just my 10 cents. Then for the role, I am going to just say role user. This one is then a user factory. Delete that. Leave a state. Returns an array. And then say public function role. We're going to pass a role into it so that if it extends, it still works. And this will return this state. The state is function array attributes. And return an array. The role is the role. This again returns an array. So what this was used is in the factory. I can then say user factory where the role is role admin. And it gives a really nice kind of fluent way of doing things. That's all good. That's all good. Email verified app. Now that's all good. Don't need to use this. And that factory is all good. So when I'm usually working locally, what I would do is turn this into SQLite. Let's comment all of that out. What I can do now is do a quick migrate. That'll create the database for me and we're good to go. So this is where we're starting. Let's now do a like a registration route, for example. I always want that included by default. So make controller, it's going to be a v1 auth registration controller. This will be invocable, and I want to pest test for it. So here we go. I can now delete that. Move it to here. This is all set up the way that I like it. Role user value. No, because on the user model now, actually, good. Thanks for reminding me, is that I can say that role is using the role num. And let's add role up here. So that works. So what we want to do here for the registration is we want to be able to register a user. So the first thing we want to do is make a request for any sort of validation. Make request v1 auth registration request. Registration request. Come over here. This is another one that I need to edit in the stubs. So if I come down to request, declare types as 1, make it final. It should always default to true. Should return an array, and I always add a payload method now. which will return a payload object later on. The factory, you don't actually need it, because what the factory will do is use Eloquent, which will handle the casting absolutely fine. You only need it on the migration because you're setting a default value as a string, so it'll match it. So let's come back to here, declare some strict types, make this final, this true, come down to here, and we're going to want public function payload, and we'll fill this out in a minute. So when we register, we need name, we need a password, an email, and we're going to want a role. Yes, if I didn't add the cast to the model, then I'd specifically have to say value for the enum, so that it's passing it through as the string type. So our name, this is quiet, should be a string, minimum of 2 and a maximum of 255. I do max 255 because I use varchar. Again, grab this. This should be an email. Password. When we register, this should be, we can then use password default. Min2 max 255, that is covered. Then the role, this is nullable. If it does exist, we need to use rule enum, where the type is role. What this will do is it's kind of like the same as an in. It'll just kind of like does a pass, enum exists, try from. It'll just kind of, it's like doing a validation in for an array, but on an enum. Then there's payload. So what I like to do here is in HTTP, I like to do payloads. I'm going to go v1 auth. What we're going to create now is a registration payload, simple class. And what this will do, public function construct. We're going to say public read-only string name, public read-only string email, public read-only string for the password, and a public read-only role. Now, this will allow us to have something nice to use. So the toArray should return an array. And the idea of the toArray is that when we create this payload, is we want a way to cast it to something that Eloquent will just work with. Password, we're just going to pass directly as password. And role, we're just going to pass through the role itself. Now this, I want to add some types. String, or a role. But we also want a static function to make this easier to create, right? So public static function from array. We're going to pass in an array of data. And this is going to return a new registration payload. Now, what we can do on this is we know we're going to get an array coming in. So we can say array shape. The name is going to be a string. The email is going to be a string. The password will be a string. And the role will be a role. So when we come down here and we can say return new registration payload, the name is data name, because we know from the array shape that we are expecting this. Data email, password, data password, and the role, data role. From a static analysis perspective, that works well. Why don't I hash password? Because I do that here. So this will return a registration payload. I want to return a registration payload from an array. Now the data that I want to pass through to this, I'll have the name. Now, because I'm in this form request, I can say this string. I want to get the name and I want to make sure that I cast it to a string. Email. I can use this string. The email, cast that as a string too. The password, I want to use hash make. Value I want to use is this string password. Keep doing that. And then the role. This has the key of role. If we have role in the request, then we're going to basically pass it. Actually, no, we'll do this get. Otherwise, we're going to pass role user. This will create the payload for us. So we want to get the name, making sure we're keeping our types nice and safe. Email, we're going to pass that through as well. Password, we're going to pass in hashed so that only our controller or our validation only ever gets the password passed to it as plain text. Anywhere else in our application that it goes needs to be pre-hashed. So now at this point, we know we can get payload. So what we need to do with that payload is pass it somewhere to create it. Now our identity domain will have a command. Spelled that wrong. So this will need to have a new command, and what it's going to be called is create new user. That's simple. But we also need our contract. What is it with me and spelling today? So we can add a new one in here. Contract. This is an interface. So we have a handle method. We'll get the registration payload. And it will return a model, more likely a user. There is a chance it could return null though. So we do union type that one there. So here we can say implements this. and we want to add the stubs. But we want to say we want to use the package for Launchpad, which we pulled in earlier. So we can say private read-only portal database. This read-only. Then what this can do, we can say return this database transaction. The callback we want to use is going to be a nice, simple user query create where the attributes is payload to array. And we want to attempt this twice. But that is the default, so we don't need to. So that could potentially throw an exception, but that is fine. Portal is just a class that I've got in Launchpad, which takes a database manager and runs a transaction. But I do it here in case I want to extend it, so that over here I can then do other things. So in my binding service provider, what I'm going to do is use a register. I usually just add an array of bindings. However, that can cause issues. So this is going to be a deferrable provider. So register returns nothing. Yeah, command is like actions. So it's more like the kind of CQRS approach over anything else. So this app bind, and the reason I use bind over singleton is because there are issues using Laravel Vapor and Laravel Octane and singletons. So that is something I'm investigating at work right now. So I'm kind of having a look into it. So anytime that I want to create user contracts, concrete implementation is create new user. Now this provides an array that we can then inject. This stream how format Laravel's. No, this is just Steve coding, working on an idea that I had to make his life easier. So what a deferrable provider will do is instead of registering this into the container all the time or when it's booting, when it will only register this into the container when it is actually needed. So it's a little bit kind of asynchronous, perhaps. It's like, okay, so my registration controller, I know I'm going to want this. So it is when this route is called and this constructor is created, my provider will then bind it to the container to pull it out where it's needed. That's about it. Command. This can then be read only. So then what I can do here, so this should return responsible. What I can then do is try the user by saying this command handle. The payload I want to pass is a request payload. That's it. I can catch anything that is throwable as an exception, and I can throw a specific exception. So what I would do in identity is create some exceptions. We will have a registration failed exception. This will just extend the default exception. Doesn't need to do anything else. But we're going to throw a new registration failed exception. The message is going to be failed to register new user. Code is going to come back from here, and we can pass the previous one through as well. Then what we need to do is return the user itself. So we need to make something else. So come down to the stubs so we can see what we're going to do. We're going to create a new resource. This will have declare strict types as 1. This will be a final class. Going to return an array. We're going to work on other things a little bit later around making this like JSON API spec. And then we're just going to say this resource ID. Up here, going to prepare ourselves for adding in the property for the resource. So let's make a resource under v1 for user resource. In our registration controller here, we can return a new model response, which is coming from Launchpad. The data that we want to pass through is a new user resource. And the status, I'm actually going to pass through status created because we just created a new resource. And the resource we want to pass through is the user. So if I zoom out, you'll see it's somewhat clean. We try to do something, we have a way to catch exceptions, and then we're returning a model response, which accepts a JSON resource and a status, and it has a response, which turns it back into a response. That is super simple, super clean, and it works. This is handled. We just need to work on this. So we can say property read for the user, the resource. So over here, this is just kind of how I like to do things. You don't have to do it this way. It really works for me. Read string for email. Read string for password. Read string. No. Role for role. Read carbon interface for the updated at. Read an interface for created at. Then this specific one is we got property read carbon interface for email verified at. That when we're going over to our resource, we got type correction, type hinting, or sorry, the auto completion. So we can say this resource name email. You can say this resource email role, this resource role value, and it was created at a certain point, so we can create a new one. Make resource, this one isn't versioned, we just have a date resource. It's kind of common and shared. New date resource, where the resource is this resource. Update resource over here. We'll have a copy read an interface for the resource, allowing us to then say that the human version is this resource if for humans, and the default string version can then come through as a resource to date time string. Perfect. Perfect. That just does it. So, how do we know it works? We kind of need to look at our testing, right? So if I just kind of close up a lot of this, what we're going to do is we're going to delete the example unit test because we don't like that. Keep for that. Delete that. Come down to our registration controller test. Declare that. So we need to register this root first. So we want to create auth.php. It means I've got a lot of files, the way that I do things, but it means my view is never too busy. So we've got a post root here, and this is going to registration controller. Simplify. Then we just need to load this into our roots here. So we can say root prefix auth as auth group path roots API v1 auth.php. Now if I go root list v1 auth register, that is loaded. It's got a nice, easy to read name. It's got its controller, and it's got that going on there. So you can say it. Let me zoom in so you can watch the tests of it. I noticed that was a little bit zoomed out, so I apologize. I've been going almost an hour and a half now, so to warn you, I'll be finishing in about 10-15 minutes. So it will actually, before we come over to this, prefix as, we're going to add middleware to this too. No, we don't. No, we don't. I don't want middleware. It will turn the correct response if validation fails. Now we're going to want some data sets. And we're going to create just random strings. What theme is this? This is just a standard light theme using the new UI. I do keep meaning to change my theme. General appearance. Yeah, there's no specific theme, color scheme, using light. I quite like Photon though. Photon's nice. We'll switch to that. Here we go, Photon. So strings, we're going to create a new data set. It is strings. Return that. We're just going to say string random done. Let's just simplify that one. And 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 random strings. You can say with strings group auth passing through the string. So when we do a post JSON to a specific URI, the action of registration controller, this keeps my test really clean as well, because I'm binding to specific controllers. So the data that we want to pass is nothing right now. We're going to assert that the status code that we get back will be status unprocessable content. And then we want to assert JSON errors, validation errors for. So the key that we expect is going to be name. We're also going to expect to have an error for email and password. Now, if I just do a quick composer test, we're good. And the correct validation response for all of these. What I need to do is in my PHP unit, make sure that these are using SQLite and that my test is actually using refresh database. Benefit of a data set is that, like here, I can say, like, I say string random and I want 280 characters, I can specify that and it'll allow me to specify it. This is just my lazy way of doing it. I can do other things.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
The school just heard about Logan.
Yeah.
They've asked me to make him another appointment with Pete because the AP code.
Okay. Sorry. Wife chats. What's the difference between post and post JSON? So that is actually a good question. If I just did post, why isn't that working? So basically, it kind of sets up all of our headers for accept JSON, content type JSON, and that sort of stuff. If I just did post, it would see it as a web request, and it would treat it as such instead of an API request. So there's a test that is working. My validation works. Next, I want to say that it will create a new user if validation passes. So next, we kind of want a similar sort of thing going on here. But the data is going to be name of string. Email, we're just going to use string at email.com, and the password is going to be password. Status, we are going to expect created status back. And then we're going to assert the JSON payload coming back. So assert JSON, pass through the assertable JSON. This has gone from building a skeleton to building an API a little bit, but it's kind of all one and the same. I want to have user management as default. So we assert that it's created. Then we're asserting that where name, where the email is this. And that's all we really need to test. I mean, we could do like a where role is user because we haven't passed it in. Role user. let me just let's test again. And now we're failing. So we're failing because no data set with strings group auth. Here we go. Now we're failing. Why are we failing? Why are we failing? Because it's going to cast it by default. Okay, so we've got a user. What we can also do is just to like make sure that we are actually creating this user and it's not there in the first place. Is I typically do like a count here, just a quick dirty count. Just to make sure that, there's no users. Oh, I create a user now. We've got a new one in the database and it's all good. So here we go. That works. We know that registration is working. My wife always interrupts me. It's fine, everyone. I'm kind of used to it. We got a lot of kids to worry about, so it's an acceptable interruption. So that was that part. So git add, git commit, starting registration. So at this point, the user is not authenticated. They've just created an account. We need to then look at how can we create API tokens for that user to allow access. So probably in my next stream, I'm going to look into JWT tokens so that we can use that instead. The phone call was about bad code. It's about your code, Chris, which we're going to talk about later. Don't worry. Right, that is all of that. I've got some stubs that I could still polish off later. Resource-wise, I don't need anything. Everything else is all good. I mean, I'd love to be able to move config into core, but I think that'll break too much. Same with database and resources, roots. No, I'm pretty happy with how it is. I'm going to push this up to GitHub. I can find it. Here we go. GitHub.com. Let's go to me. Let's create a new repo. And we're going to stick with the name Skeleton. And what I would do is make sure I've got the name right. Up here, the Skeleton application for Laravel APIs. In the repo. Let's just get this all pushed up so then make sure it's there for everyone. I haven't done much on the README, so how to use it is going to be watch back on the stream, but we'll come back to that later on. So we've got a .core app, all of our roots, everything is all as we would want it. Domain identity, got a command to create a user. It's nice and clean, it works. And that is that. So thank you all for tuning in. I'm going to show my face a second again. Haha, surprise, I'm still here. So thanks for tuning in. We're going to pick this up again soon. What day is it? It is Wednesday. I might be able to squeeze another stream in tomorrow, so let me know if you'd like to see me work on this some more tomorrow. Other than that, have a good day, good evening, good morning, whatever time it is. Enjoy yourself, stay awesome, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.